Welcome to Rambling with Rainstorm Live. I'm Rainstorm Live, or Nick, if we're going to keep it casual here. And this episode is on Scott Pilgrim. So, recently I've been rewatching all of the Scott Pilgrim related things, I finished watching the TV show last night, and then today my friend was over and I decided to show them the Scott Pilgrim movie, because it's one of my favorite movies and they hadn't seen it, so why not introduce them? And it really got me thinking, because I've been on, this whole, obsessed with Scott Pilgrim, the franchise, kick recently. And I really didn't know what to make this episode on. Why not make it on something I'm currently interested in? So, let's get into it. Who are our main characters? Well, it's in the title. Scott Pilgrim. This 22-year-old, 23-year-old, depending on what you watch, guy who's kind of your run-of-the-mill, lazy schlum. Which, not a great look. Also, he's dating a 17-year-old. Which, also, not a great look. But yeah, he's in a band, they're called the Sex Bombs, and we'll get more into that in a minute. But next up, we have to meet our leading lady, Ramona Flowers. She's pretty swag, she changes her hair all the time, and it's always such pretty colors. She rollerblades, and she's an American, which, by the way, if you didn't know, this entire franchise is set in Toronto, Canada, which I'm not familiar with, so I'm not going to speak on it, because I don't want to get anything wrong and offend anyone. Because I am, very unfortunately, an American. Anyway, enough about me. Back to topic. Ramona's an American, and she comes to Toronto, Canada on her roller skates to get away from her past, which leaves us in an interesting position, considering we don't know anything about this brand new character. Now, the best man, Wallace Wells. Wallace Wells is Scott Pilgrim's gay roommate, and you may be thinking, wow, Nick, why must you emphasize the fact that he's gay? Well, that's because throughout the entire film, Wallace is busy making out with pretty much any man he can, and it's a very prominent theme. This also goes for the anime. So it's not really that out of character to note it. Anyway, Wallace owns most of the stuff in his and Scott's house, and Scott just kind of lives there rent-free, which, bad idea on Scott's part, you know what I mean. Now on to the members of Scott's band, Sex Bomb. You have this character whose name is Young Neil. However, Young Neil is very, I don't quite know how to describe it. He's not a band member, but he knows all of Scott's parts, almost wishing to replace Scott, apparently. And then later on in the film, he does replace Scott as part of the band, when Scott's like, fuck you guys. Well, I wouldn't say that he says that, but he's like, I'm gonna go with Ramona. You guys are doing so great. So there's that. Next up, you have Stephen Stills. He's the lead singer and guitarist, and he is pretty cool. He's very chill, very, very band-focused, though. And next up, you have the lovely Miss Kim Pines. Kim Pines is Scott Pilgrim's ex, and they're in a band together, which, good for Scott, but you can also tell that it does kind of suck to be in her position, and you can see it very prominently throughout the movie. She gives off this very don't care, do whatever you want attitude, but you can see this one scene where she is very clearly still hurt by their breakup. Also, not a member of Sex Bomb, but another popular band, Clash at Demon Head, is one of Scott's big exes, and if you haven't gotten it yet, whether from seeing the movie or listening to me ramble, a very big theme in this film is relationships, but not in the very, oh, how much I adore this person kind of way, but more in the, you have to defeat my 7 evil exes kind of way, which, the 7 evil exes is where this came from, actually. Scott Pilgrim dated the lovely Miss Envy Adams, which is played by and voiced by the lovely Brie Larson. However, she does look slightly different between the movie and the anime, but it's overall the same character, Scott's one big ex. He apparently, and I say that with quotations, but apparently she breaks up with him for stardom after sleeping with this super awesome vegan who has vegan powers, and his name is Todd Ingram, who we'll touch back on him later, because turns out he's not just some random vegan, he's a pretty major character. Let's talk more about this lovely Miss Ramona Flowers, though. She is our leading lady, and we've barely discussed her. And what about these whole 7 evil exes I've mentioned? Well, the past Ramona is trying to escape is in fact these 7 evil exes. These 7 evil exes are completely wrecking Ramona's entire love life, following her from 7th grade all the way to till she's 23, which pretty long time, because most 7th graders are 12, so that's almost 12 years she's had to deal with this mysterious evil past. Scott Pilgrim is set to fight these 7 evil exes in order to date Ramona, but why are they called the 7 evil exes? What have they done that has made them so evil? In full honesty, the answer is nothing. None of them are truly evil, they just have a very complicated love life with Ramona Flowers. Which brings us to our very first ex, Matthew Patel. This is ex 1 of 7, and he first approaches Scott at a battle of the bands. He meets Ramona in 7th grade, and they lasted about a week and a half before Ramona, unfortunately, kicked him to the curb. He approaches Scott during this battle of the bands in this very, you must die now kind of demeanor, whereas Scott barely knows what's going on. Matthew Patel looks quite a bit like a pirate, which they comment on in the movie, and Matthew gets very defensive. He's like, pirates are in this year, which is kind of interesting, because I don't know the last time pirates was in fashion. He and Scott do a little bit of kicking and punching before Matthew Patel breaks out into this incredible song about fighting Scott Pilgrim and his demon hipster chicks. It's an interesting experience to watch, but can be very confusing if not paying attention. After this whole debate song thing, Scott eventually kicks his ass and sends him to the curb. And then there's some more Battle of the Bands, Clash at Demon Head drama. Then we get to ex number 2 and Wallace Wells' celebrity crush. Ex number 2 is none other than Lucas Lee, who is played by the very famous Chris Evans. And if you don't know anything Chris Evans has been in, you should watch Captain America. He is Captain America. Anyway, he's not Captain America in this. He's Lucas Lee, Hollywood star, awesome sauce skateboarder. He dated Ramona, and I don't remember how or when they were together, but they were the thing shortly, and he's this very big, buff dude who's all that, pretty much. And Scott defeats him by challenging him to a grind-off, where Chris Evans' character, Lucas Lee, grinds on his skateboard down a very, very large ramp up to 400 kilometers per hour, which, for my Americans, is roughly 279.62 miles per hour. And yes, I looked that up because I don't know it off the top of my head, and also I lied, that number that I told you in miles per hour is actually closer to 450 kilometers per hour, because roughly that's how fast he was going on the skateboard. Eventually, back to the movie, Chris Evans' character goes kaboom, and Scott wins battle number 2. On to battle number 3. Battle number 3 is, if you remember me mentioning earlier, our super awesome vegan-powered Todd Ingram, who just so happens to be dating Scott's big ex, Envy Adams. Clash at Demon Head shows up in Toronto, Canada, and invites Sex Bomb to open for them, which it gets pretty complicated for Scott, because performing in the band or facing off against his ex. Pretty hard decision. But eventually they do that, and Sex Bomb is invited backstage for a private interview with Miss Envy Adams and her band. At this point, Todd fights Scott over Ramona and is honestly kicking Scott's ass with his super awesome vegan power. However, Scott does win the fight because he's our main character. He's got plot armor. He wins the fight by convincing Todd to drink half and half, which is not vegan. And then the vegan police show up and they're like, Todd Ingram, you have broken the vegan police rules. And Todd's like, what do you mean? It's only my first offense. You're like, nuh-uh-uh. You ate gelato knowingly, you had chicken parmesan, and you just drank half and half, which is 3 strikes, buddy. And Todd's like, wait, those aren't vegan? Because Todd's a little silly sometimes. So the vegan police take him away, and thankfully for us, Scott Pilgrim has won once again, which takes us to X number 4. X number 4 is personally one of my favorite exes, and her name is Roxy Richter, and she dated Ramona in college. However, she is very, very upset by the fact that Ramona insists them dating was only a phase, and that Ramona was just bi-curious, because we don't see it a lot in the movie, but in the anime, we see this entire sequence of how Ramona and Roxy truly cared for each other, rather than what we see with any of Ramona's other exes, which I think is very interesting, and it really shows more to both of their characters, and it also shows how Ramona constantly runs away from all of her problems, than actually sorting through them. Ramona fights Roxy because Scott doesn't want to, quite honestly, and then, Roxy's like, Scott actually has to fight me if we want this to count. So then Ramona's like kicking Roxy's ass, but using Scott's hands to do so. It's very complicated. You should really watch it. But, it makes sense once it's watched. If I'm honest. I'm gonna be so real. Anyway, Roxy gets turned into a pile of coins like the rest of our exes once Scott touches the back of her knees, because that's her weak point, apparently. I don't know if that goes for a lot of people or if it's just a her thing, but who knows. Exes number 5 and 6 are actually twins, which, cool for Ramona. She also dated them in college and convinced them to help her with her computer science homework, I think it was. But eventually, the twins found out that she was playing them, and she ran away, like every other time she did it. Scott must defeat these 2 exes in another Battle of the Bands, which is Amp versus Amp, which means they're playing at the exact same time. And eventually, the twins have these 2 dragons that come out to fight from the music they're playing, and Sex Bomb is this gorilla thing, and the twins literally blow the roof off the place, but somehow Scott still manages to win, because he's the main character, and he has plot armor. And at this Battle of the Bands is when X number 7, the big, the bad, Gideon Graves, makes his appearance. Gideon Graves is a record owner in New York City in America, and came to get Ramona back, and we find out that he really has this way of getting into Ramona's head, which we find out later is actually a chip he microplanted, which, by the way, super fucked up. After the whole Battle of the Bands, Amp versus Amp, with the twins and Sex Bomb, Ramona leaves with Gideon, unable to do anything about it. Scott's sad and lonely because the love of his life just willingly left him for one of her exes, so Gideon invites him to his new fun zone pyramid thingy. I forgot what it's called, but you know what I mean if you've seen the movie. Scott shows up and is like, I'm fighting for Ramona, and then a sword comes out of his chest, and it's like, whoa! And Scott earns the power of love, apparently, and then he dies, and you're like, what? No! He can't be dead! And you're right, he's not, because he's the main character, and he's got what we call plot armor. After Ramona visits Scott in this dreamscape land that Ramona uses all the time to get to place and so quickly, we find out that Scott has come back to life. And then he goes and he fights Gideon again, but this time he doesn't do it for Ramona. He does it for himself, and another sword comes out of his chest, and it's the power of self-respect, which, super awesome for you, Scott. I'm so proud. You're finally getting somewhere with your life. And Scott's like, your party sucks, my band is so much better than this, Ramona, you're so much better than this. And that's when we find out Scott's 17-year-old ex-girlfriend, Knives Chow, was hiding to attack Ramona for breaking the heart that broke hers, which, valid, but also, girly, you're 17, you can do better than a 22-year-old loser. Let's go. Get better, girl. At that point, Gideon Graves gets defeated, Knives and Ramona make peace, but movie's not over. There's more. But what is this? Nega Scott? Scott Pilgrim must fight himself for Ramona Flowers, considering he technically counts as an ex, which really makes it 8 evil exes, but whatever. Movies, whatever they do, you know? But instead of defeating himself into a little pile of coins, turns out Scott's become best friends and they're getting brunch next weekend, in which Ramona's about to leave and run away from her problems all again, in which Knives Chow's like, Scott, you love her, go after her, which, by the way, Knives, so proud, you've grown so much in an hour and 30 minutes. I'm so proud. A lot faster than I can say for most of the other characters in this film. Wallace is still dating all the men and loving life. Scott walks off into this magical door portal with Ramona, and movie's over, pretty much. And I don't know if I stated it earlier, but this movie came out in 2010, which means we are concluding talking about the movie, but this does lead us into Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, the 2023 anime found on Netflix. Now, it's been a hot minute since I've watched the beginning of this anime because I got distracted around episode 6 and forgot about it for 2 months. But from what I can remember, the anime starts off in a very similar theme to the movie. Scott Pilgrim is still dating this 17-year-old girl named Knives Chow. He has his gay roommate Wallace Wells and his band. And instead of the band coming to perform, I think later on, young Neil writes a screenplay, well, young Neil, I say in quotations, which is found out in the anime, writes a screenplay about Scott Pilgrim's life, which just so happens to be the script of the 2010 movie. In this movie that young Neil writes in the anime, we see an incredible different cast of characters come back to play their original roles such as they had in the earlier film. And the only reason we know that this screenplay young Neil wrote is the actual movie from the original is because Chris Evans' character, Lucas Lee, comes back and says, "How could I be stupid enough to fall for a grind-off where I skate to my death?" In which is how he died in the movies. Eventually, this movie gets canceled because Wallace and Todd end up hooking up all the time, and the movie falls to shambles. Scott goes missing, though, and Ramona is on her way to figure out which of her big 7 evil exes took Scott away from her using super awesome vegan portal powers. Around the end of episode 8, we find out it was in fact not one of the 7 evil exes, but it was older Scott Pilgrim himself that took Scott to warn him, do not ever be with Ramona Flowers, your life will be ruined. With that, Scott is like, no dude, you're crazy, I love her, she's the one, and fights his way back in time. We go to this play based off of young Neil's thing, in which we see Scott's life, but it gets stopped halfway through because they are taken to even older Scott's land, where he insists on fighting Scott Pilgrim over Ramona. Ramona finds her future self, and they seek solace within each other, in which they realize they choose each other rather than either of the Scotts. And the show ends with Ramona finding inner peace, Scott getting the girl, and the band is still pretty good. I'm sure I'm missing plenty of information, but this is already like 20 minutes long, and I don't want to sit here to bore you for too long. That's what later episodes are for. But, you know, I'm sorry if I didn't get everything. It's been a hot minute since I've watched all of the show in one sitting, and I watched the movie partially yesterday, but I was mostly distracted with dyeing my hair, because I've seen it before and it was great background noise. But yeah, this has been Rambling with Rainstorm Live, and I'm your awesome sauce host, Rainstorm Live, or Nick, keeping it casual. See you guys next time, and I hope you enjoyed. If you happen to enjoy the podcast and have an idea of what I should talk about next time, you should send me an email at contact@rainstormlive.com, which is CONTACT@Rainstormlive.com. Thank you for being here, and I will catch you on the flip side, everyone.